So our first set of speakers today are Jennifer Thomas and Andy von Bradsky, and they are going to be talking about policy and practice and setting the scene for the day, really, discussing the ways in which we as professionals can all work together. Jennifer is head of the built environment at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and she leads the design team who have responsibility for promoting design quality across government programmes and the overall construction sector. With a PhD in the impact of the built environment, Jenny also draws on her experience as Head of Research and Policy for the British Council for School Environments, and as previously as Managing Director of Performance Consultancy, which specialises in evidence-based design. So a very qualified speaker to kick us off. We also have Andy von Bradsky, who's an architectural advisor at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and he builds on 30 years of experience as an architect, designing and delivering housing and regeneration for both private and public sectors. He also draws on extensive experience as a former chairman of PRP, an architectural practice which specialised in housing, and I believe in your current role you're supporting planning and design and housing supply and regeneration programmes nationally. So I'd like to welcome you both up to kick off the morning.
Tom introduced us to say that we are the design team from MHCLG, and Steve Quartermain, Chief Planner, was invited to speak today and just sent his apologies. He's currently in the south of France, so he asked us to attend on his behalf. And really because we are the design team within the planning team. So I think that's the key thing here in terms of the collaboration. So I head up the design team. We're supported by Andy von Bradsky, who works very closely with us as our architectural advisor. And we sit right in the heart of planning, but work across the department. So we work in various different ways. It's really important that design sits within planning because it is a start of that collaborative approach. And I know Steve was very pleased that this event was happening because he's been very proactively pushing for an RTPI-RIBA joint event. So he was very keen that we come along and represent the ministry here. I'm going to pass over to Andy, who's going to give you some of the background to the design team and what we do within planning and why we're there. He was instrumental in setting up the design team before I arrived, so he can give you some of that background, and then we'll tell you a bit more about the work that we're doing within the ministry.
Yes, this is going to be a bit of a double act, and anyway, good morning to everybody, and great to be here, especially supporting RIBA and RTPI very much in the spirit of collaboration, which we'll come on to. I'm going to be just sort of setting the scene a little bit in terms of the background to the work we're doing, some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with into the future. As Tom said, I'm an architect, and it's really encouraging that government recognises the importance of the role of architects, and I was actually actively encouraged to continue working with the department. I'm on a short-term contract, but will be supporting very much the work that the ministry is doing and hoping to set a precedent for continuing architectural input into the ministry. What we're talking about here is the background to it. We'll talk a little bit about the design team, what do we mean by quality, so we'll go into that a bit. Jenny will talk a lot about the action plan and how we're taking that forward, and a little bit about how we continue to refer to our work, or how we're engaging, I suppose, with stakeholders in our work. And very much in the spirit of collaboration. I think we recognise that there's a role in quality for every party, not just architects, planners, but also developers, communities, their representatives, in taking forward quality. Just while we go straight forward, defining quality is an important thing right at the beginning in terms of what we're talking about. Quality, obviously, very much in the spotlight at the moment for all sorts of reasons to do with tragedies, to do with building safety, to do with the performance in the industry and the perception by the public in terms of the kind of quality of buildings that they're getting or buying. I suppose you might break it down into two key themes. One is design quality, that is, what's the context, how does it fit in an urban context, the urban realm, as Tom said, the appearance of it, how it responds to community and how it supports health, those sort of issues. There's also the other side, which is the technical quality. That's to do with functionality, integrity, longevity, and so forth. And those sort of two extremes have got real examples of how not to do it and how to do it, and examples of failure, of course, that I refer to. You might actually go back to the sort of firmers commodity delight, sort of Vitruvius aspect to this. The thing is, it all works together. You can't just have a separation of design and technical. It needs all work together, because no matter how well designed it is, if it's not built well, you're not going to achieve a quality outcome. But in terms of the work that I'm doing with Jenny here and with Steve Quatermain, it's very much to do with the design aspect. Just by way of background, the reason I was brought into the department was to help Lord Heseltine write the policy, the Estate Regeneration National Strategy, which you may recall was called for by David Cameron, Prime Minister at the time, to help regenerate what he described as sink estates, in which we sort of put a policy around which helped, I think, frame the whole issue around addressing social housing failures. So very much a sort of an example of extreme failure in the industry of design and planning. It's been part of my professional life dealing with regeneration. It's a major sort of theme that is ongoing, and it's actually, the failure is a cost to the state at the end of the day. So this is about how what we do saves effectively the state having to step in to bail out and to help regenerate places. And we know in the area of Essex, places like Thurrock and Southend, and we'll probably hear from Belle Phillips a little bit about the work they're doing in that area. So that's how I started in my work with the ministry, and it was dealing with all these sort of social failure and building failure issues. My role was really to demonstrate how to get the design and the quality built into the Estate Regeneration National Strategy, and so we referred to all these particular issues in terms of design, placemaking, character, right through to management. And I really urge you to have a look at the Estate Regeneration National Strategy, which is on the website. It's on gov.uk, and you will see within it a good practice guide which refers to good design and quality, and that's where it sort of it got recognised, and I was asked effectively to stay on to help on the broader theme of design quality in general. The importance of resident engagement is another collaboration theme. How do you get communities and local people involved in estate regeneration? To do it well, you must engage. It's an essential component of regeneration, is to engage with that community. And I suppose that's a theme at the moment that will be coming through our talk, which is about how do we get communities to support more housing, and how do we get them to sort of engage more positively in the planning process. In regeneration, it's all about building trust and rebuilding trust, and we've got some real work to do with recent events in terms of building trust with people living in social housing, for example. So there are lessons which are transferable to the general public in terms of general housing. Just before I sort of started the work on this, on design quality within the department, the housing white paper came out, and you'll see lots of references to quality in there, about how it was recognised at the time of writing it that there was community disengagement of support for development generally, and the importance of getting community involved, getting planning right to make sure that there's better engagement and that the outcomes from the planning process are better and leading to better quality. And there's reference also to looking into the future in terms of how better to engage with communities through digital platforms and so forth, and to provide capacity funding, recognising that local authorities don't have all the resources needed to up their game. We set out right at the beginning of our design quality work some aims, which was really quite ambitious in terms of trying to make a national profile for this, recognising that we've got all the tools in the box effectively as a profession or a group of professions, that we needed to empower local authorities to a high degree. We needed to demonstrate effectively through research measurable economic benefits arising from design quality. One of the first things I did when I got involved in this was to set up what we called a Design Quality Symposium, which was hosted by RIBA at Portland Place. And we had 40 professionals, developers, local authority representatives, design advisors come to Portland Place and talk with the minister at the time, the housing minister at the time, and hosted effectively by MHCL or DCLG as then was. Through the discussions, there was sort of a whole series of discussions about what were the perceived barriers and the issues that prevented an improvement overall in design quality in the work that we do. And this is the list of 10 points that we distilled out of that. And it's quite interesting now I look back and see some of the work that we're doing. We are actually addressing quite a number of these points, which Jenny and her team are now sort of gradually working their way through, and which you'll hear more about. Particularly planning, how to improve the planning process, how to improve the quality of the resources coming forward, what are the tools and techniques that are needed to support that, how do we get communities better engaged, what's the role of PINs, the inspectors, in terms of underpinning quality over viability, for example, and some general sort of dissatisfaction, if you like, at the customer satisfaction surveys that get carried out, which paint the house builder sector in particular in better light than perhaps it should be. I think that's me. I think I'll hand over to you now, Jenny.
Thanks, Andy. So as Andy's obviously set the scene for what we're trying to do, our team was then developed and set up in about March, and this is the team behind us. Some of you will recognise Steve Quartermain at the back. He leads the team, and as I say, it's an integral part and it sits within planning. Supporting the team is Andy, who brings his expertise from the industry, helps us to understand delivery in both the planning and design context. And then we're supported by Simi, Adam and Ian, who are also on that screen, who you will hopefully see it around and about future events and in future initiatives that we're running. The key thing really for our team is to make sure that we influence in various different ways across the ministry and across the sector. The big area for us obviously would be around policy and planning reform. And that's just making sure that design quality is an integral part of that, so that planning policy and design sit together to enable them to work well. In addition to that, we look at quality within government programmes that we're delivering, and I'll give you a bit more detail about that as I go through. That's both with programmes that are held within MHCLG, but also working with Homes England and other people delivering public land programmes. Evidence gathering is going to be a big part of our work. From my background in terms of post-occupancy evaluation, us having the evidence about the impact of design and quality, and therefore how it should influence planning, is going to be really important to us. And from that, we're going to make sure that we're sharing good practice about how things are achieved and developments that are delivered. And to do that, working with other government departments and looking at making sure it's a joined up approach across government departments such as transport, health, education, that it's not just about sitting within the planning department, it's about spreading that design and planning wider. In terms of our work so far, our big event has been the Design Quality Conference, which was opened by, as I now have to say, our then Housing Minister, Dominic Raab, and was closed by our then Secretary of State, Sajid Javid. But it showed a real strong support and commitment from ministers. And in terms of consistency, that continues to run through. The department are very committed to design quality, and the new minister coming in, and particularly the new Secretary of State, have been engaged in that agenda. So they understand the importance of planning and of design. The design conference was a very positive start for us. It was a really good launch to demonstrate our commitment to design quality, but also to make sure that everybody was aware that it was about collaboration. So we had a whole range of attendees, from design professionals to planners to developers, academics, industry bodies, all coming together to really understand that the collaborative approach was essential to deliver that design quality. We have had a subsequent seminar in Manchester at the CIH last month, and we're planning future events to sort of take that message out about design quality and collaboration, again bringing together the different disciplines. And planning itself, and again I'm sure many of you will be aware, has become very high profile from a ministerial point of view. It's got strong support from the Prime Minister. She recognises that to deliver their ambition of 300,000 homes by 2020, that both design quantity and quality are important, and that the planning system is an integral part of delivering that. So she was at the launch of the revised NPPF in March, and has subsequently supported the policy going forward. Within the draft revised NPPF, design quality is sort of woven throughout, just to support that kind of national planning policy. In terms of sustainable development, economic, social and environmental, achieving that without design quality isn't really possible, which just demonstrates the essential nature of it. There's obviously a dedicated chapter to achieving well-designed places, which focuses on design and calls for a refusal of permissions for poor design quality. So the need for an understanding there within planning of what that poor design quality might be. And also a recognition of the importance of early engagement with communities for the support of design quality, and the use of tools and techniques for assessing and delivering, measuring that design quality. But it's also within other chapters of the NPPF. So safe and healthy places, a requirement again for design quality to support that, and an understanding of how design can influence those things, and making effective use of land. So ensuring that that's not just a focus on increasing density, but that actually placemaking and positive placemaking has to form a part of that. And through the guidance that's being produced, we'll continue to influence, as we have done with the policy itself, to make sure that design is a key part of that. In addition to the NPPF, we're also working in wider housing policies, such as the Social Housing Green Paper, which Andy has been working on, to make sure, again, that design quality continues to be embedded in these policies that are being produced. Within government programmes themselves, it's also important that we continue to influence from a design quality point of view. Planning and the programme delivery are linked very closely within the department, and we work across the two to ensure that policy that is there is then delivered within government programmes. We're working closely with the Garden Communities programme. We're also looking at the neighbourhood plans and the toolkits that are available within that to make sure that design quality is a major part of it. Beyond the programmes solely within our department, we're also working with others, such as NHS England Healthy New Towns programme, again to bring the policy and design element into those programmes. Homes England, obviously a key partner for the MHCLG in terms of delivering programmes for the government. They are currently developing their approach to design quality, and some of you will know have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Design Council to promote quality placemaking, which happened at the design conference. So we're going to continue to support them with that agenda. And the last thing really is around how we do that is through the place criteria, making sure that the criteria within proposals, prospectuses, programmes coming through, and the assessment criteria for those includes a high level of design quality. So it's ensuring that whilst planning is influencing, design quality is also a key part. And that's making sure that we use the right design tools and processes to do that. So I'll come and talk a bit more detail about how we're doing that in a moment. Beyond that, we are also supporting the diversification. So this is something that is obviously a growing part of the sector in terms of what people are looking at in different areas. So council building and how that can be supported locally. The build to rent sector and what we can learn from that in terms of particularly around, for example, stewardship and maintenance of place. And it's just making sure that, again, design quality feeds throughout these, but also that the planning process supports them as well so that they can be delivered effectively. In terms of the design criteria, there is a drive, certainly within the draft revised MPPF and from MHCLG, for it to be locally led, and we continue to support that. So it's not about setting a government agenda or government design guide for what design quality is. It's very much about supporting it to be developed at the local level and just taking on board some of the key principles that make design quality happen. So looking particularly within the draft revised MPPF, there's a focus on context and making sure that it adds to an overall quality of an area when there's a new development. Character, so that it responds to the local character and history in which it's being set, while still promoting innovation. Connectivity, making sure that both within a development and beyond, it's connected into that local area through transport, streetscapes and public space. And then finally, community, so supporting communities, creating safe places for people to live that promote well-being, reduce risk of crime, etc. And as I've mentioned, it is about a joined-up approach to quality. So it's making sure that we are looking not just within our own department, but across departments to help join up that thinking around how design quality can work. We're working also with the sector to look at things around master planning, how transport infrastructure and green infrastructure need to be brought in for effective placemaking, working with departments like Department for Transport to do that, and also looking at the amenities that are required and the facilities to help create that effective place that supports education, supports employment, has a positive impact on health and well-being, links into local culture and heritage, and also has a positive impact in relation to environmental performance. So again, working across sector and across departments to do that. As I said, I'd talk specifically about tools and techniques. This is going to be one of the key focuses of our work this year, and it's going to be looking at not the tools that are available, because we know that you as a sector know that, and we know what is being used currently, but looking at how they can be used effectively. So making sure that the philosophy for applying things such as Building for Life 12 is that it is really to drive up design quality as opposed to potentially a tick box exercise, and that it's applied in the correct way at the right time, looking at ways in which people have adapted it locally to suit local needs and deliver what's really needed in particular areas, looking at the timeliness of those use of those tools, and also looking at different scales as well. So what applies well to a large scale development down to, say, a small site development, and how we can make sure that those tools can be used effectively to benefit the whole sector. And one of the other areas of our work that I just wanted to finish with before I hand back over to Andy is around sustainable outcomes. So this is very much predicated on my previous experience of evidence-based design and an understanding of why design quality is important. We can then make sure that it is able to use to inform the planning process, to inform what's delivered, by demonstrating the value of what is there and creating sustainable outcomes. So looking particularly at the value of design from a social value, economic and environmental perspective, looking at whether design needs to cost more and what those benefits can be in terms of value if there's high design quality.
So Jenny's talked very much about what government are trying to do. I think there are other players that need to be sort of brought into the mix here. So the role of local authority is really important in terms of setting their idea, their vision for what their area is. And there's sort of places that do this really well, and there are places that are not so good at this. And it's all about how do you create distinctiveness, how do you create a local response, how do you build on the character of an area, how do you enhance an area's character through use of materials, use of topography and so on. What's the story effectively that you want the designers to respond to? So this is all about how not just the officers but also elected members representing their communities might actually sort of buy into this idea of having a local vision and a local ambition, and what is the leadership that sits behind that. I think we recognise that a lot of councillors, a lot of people who represent their communities on committees need to be much better informed, and there is at the moment, I'm sure you know, a capacity fund that government has allowed local authorities to pitch in for called the Planning Delivery Fund, which has been allocated. We're hoping that that will lead to better skills within local authorities that help develop the sort of tools that are needed to also represent the vision. So DPDs, codes, guides, those sort of tools that then set a very clear parameter for what developers need to respond to. And I always draw attention to the Manchester Residential Design Guide as being a really good example of how they've drawn from local character, how they've drawn from and set their expectations out in a very clear way so developers know when they come to Manchester what to expect in terms of delivery. Now, I talked a lot about how we get residents engaged much earlier in the process. Again, this is something that industry needs to find a way of doing. It's also about local authorities enabling it to happen, but industry needs to move away from this notion of holding events in obscure times during the week on a hotel somewhere on a Thursday night and say that they've consulted the local community about their proposals. It's much more proactive than that, and it's about getting them engaged very early on, helping them to understand the narrative behind design, helping them to sort of, you're almost selling the ideas to communities to bring them along with your ideas. And as Jenny mentioned, lots of tools and techniques are available to do that in a very strong and proactive way. BIMBY, the Planning for Real exercises, and those exercises which we'll be promoting. We don't want to sort of send the message out that we're not delivering good quality. I think the issue is that parts of the industry are doing this really well. You saw the images of the awards that were being shown. The Housing Design Awards, which were announced last week and which I helped on the judging, is another example of just how good the industry can be. And if anything, the quality has lifted over the last 10 years that I've been practicing. But has the bar lifted generally? And it's all about getting the consistency of the industry to respond so it's about encouraging the laggards, if you like, and we'll do that through sticks and carrots. So just a few words about the sort of design aspect. Placemaking, a key theme of what we're trying to do. There's some really good examples of placemaking around. Landowners that take a very long-term view about development are the ones who often invest quite heavily in the placemaking approach, creating an investment right early on which might pay dividends much later, making a place that works. It's not just about homes, but it's about a mix of uses, and it's about how it connects with its wider context and what is the character of that particular place that you're creating. The Duchy of Cornwall clearly does this particularly well. And this is an example from one of the Duchy's work in Cornwall itself. And this is a real collaboration between a county council that really cared about quality and has really stepped up their game and set out all the visions that are needed and are setting very clear parameters about how developers should respond to that. And for placemaking, it's all about picking the right partner, it's about picking the right designers and the right builders to build this out. I often get I often hear stories about quality not being affordable, and you know, from my previous experience as a designer and running a large practice, I know that affordable quality is deliverable. It's a poor excuse to say that it can't be afforded. An example of this was on a PFI scheme which came through in London and had to be completely pared back in terms of costings when the 2010 crash happened. And we actually did a really excellent job of just making it simple, repetitive, high quality materials, but done repetitively, and made sure that we picked up on the character of the area. And we created a really new heart of an area in South London as a consequence. So don't let them argue that quality can't be afforded. I wanted to talk about a few words about the technical aspects, because you can't, as I said earlier, detach quality from the technical aspect. If you know, if it fails, if what might look good fails in technical terms, then it's hardly good quality. Some real issues in terms of regulation, in terms of building safety, in terms of the build, in terms of procurement, real systemic issues that are affecting the industry at the moment, and it's coming through some of the reports that we're hearing, including Hackett Review and the APPG. So there's some big issues for us all to be dealing with in terms of the architectural approach. It's also about how you create that golden thread and who is responsible throughout the whole process. So there's some big debates to be had. In terms of what government's doing around this, it really is putting its weight behind modern methods of construction. It recognises that to build 300,000 new homes a year by 2020 or the mid-2020s, you're going to need new ways of delivering housing. You're going to need new skills and new training, a much more diverse mix of people involved in the industry. And the government's doing its best to put funding in to help with the training and to actually remove some of the obstacles in terms of finance, mortgages, insurance and assurance issues that have held this particular industry back. In terms of converting that into design quality, some really good examples, and here in Essex, actually, the Swan development in Basildon is a particularly good example of how you can combine off-site manufacture, modern methods of construction, call it what you will, with customization, assembly of elements, and putting that together into new and different street patterns and scenes, and allowing the purchaser to actually have a very engaged approach to how their house is developed. Other examples, I'm sure you know Northwest Cambridge, Cambridge University's development. We highlighted this particular project at our design conference, and it's quite inspiring to see long-term thinking that goes on with universities who have a sort of legacy issue to address. And not only is it a 100-year life, it's a lot longer than that they're thinking about. But how they've gone about that is probably as close to the Olympic experience as we've got currently. So we sort of suggest people go and have a look at that. It was mentioned about new challenges. Tom mentioned that right at the beginning. We're very mindful of that in government, about new things coming over the horizon. The ageing population is upon us, and we'll get significantly more of a challenge. So there's some real design typologies, some real sort of issues around how you integrate health, well-being, and housing for older people. Housing for younger people, I think, mentioned also, you know, how young people are changing their patterns of home ownership or home renting. More of a shift towards renting rather than ownership of both cars and housing. The whole digital future and how that will play out and how that impacts on design, more people working from home. There's some really big issues, and I applaud Essex County Council for its design guide in terms of recognising some of those challenges, and local authorities need to be aware of it, but also developers need to be innovating, and architects need to be thinking around some of these issues and being brave in terms of tackling some new issues. So ingredients for success, I think we've sort of touched on a number of these points already, but local leadership, a really important point in terms of local authorities and how they view development in their area being. And then the developers, I think, need to assume that this won't be regulated, this won't have new standards attached to it. This is all about how clients or developers need to think intelligently about the future of their stock. And you know, those like housing associations, councils, who will hold on to their stock need to be thinking about the whole life aspect and the aspect about investing now for saving later. And sadly, that's sort of been a missing component, but we're seeing a lot of councils starting to recognise that as an approach. So popular design, a really important point, you know, making sure that the designs that you come forward with have popular support are not just something that architects like to do, but also resonates with local people and is popular. And that it's not just about what goes in planning, it's about what gets built. So how do you embed quality in the planning process and in the procurement process as well? And one theme that I haven't sort of talked about much is about place management and stewardship. And this is all about not just how do you design and deliver a building, but how do you look after it over the longer term? And there's much more importance, I think, attached to that. When you look around your towns and cities, you see buildings that have been really good when they've been first built, but after 5 years look shabby and sorry for themselves. So how do you create buildings that endure and places that last? Thank you very much.
This is our last slide, really, on the theme of collaboration, is that we want to continue collaborating, both with yourselves across the sector, across other government departments. So we welcome anybody contacting us who wants to talk to us. This email address, I did check yesterday, it wasn't quite live, so I'll wait until the end of the week before you try it. But from next week, that should be live, and we'll be using that. As I say, we want to keep the conversation going. So in terms of events happening, activities that we're doing, it's very much about an outward-facing approach. So please do stay in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for setting the scene for the day. Some really interesting points. I think we're going to open the floor up for the next 10 minutes to Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions, do feel free to put your hand up. And please wait until the microphone is brought to you before you start speaking. I'm going to kick off Q&A, if that's right. I had a couple of questions. The first question I had was, you mentioned about the post-occupancy evaluation and about analysis being able to feed into decision-making and planning policy moving forward. Is the intention for that to be publicly available and all the data to be sort of shared publicly?
So in terms of evaluation, we're at the stage really of just initially gathering evidence about the impact of design quality and that initial report will be available. In terms of post-occupancy going forward, that's an area that we're starting to look at. Having worked previously in health and education, they've probably moved a little bit further forward than it has in terms of housing and placemaking. So it will be learning from the work that's happening there. But certainly the initial research that we're hoping to undertake within the next year is something that we are intending to publish.
We have a question.
Thinking back a few years to the sort of halcyon days when CABE had 100 members of staff and was blazing away. Obviously, a lot of that was swept away, but there were things that happened then that I think perhaps worth revisiting, and maybe you are. I realise in your presentation you're talking about local design guides, which is a very worthwhile thing to capture the particular circumstances in places, but the document by design and the document which English Partnerships produced, the Urban Design Compendium, the two parts of those were excellent, enduring quality. And I think quite a lot of councils, and I work for Norwich City Council, still have those on their shelves and refer to them. And it's sort of regrettable, I suppose, that they can't be cited as in any sense as having government endorsement or being policy. The other thing I wanted to mention was around the affordable homes programme. Perhaps it's my lack of knowledge, but previously I think there was an attempt to allocate funding for the affordable homes programme partly on the basis of achieving certain standards of design as measured through Building for Life in its previous incarnation. I'm not aware that happens still, and if I'm correct in that, I think that's also regrettable, and wonder if that might be reintroduced in some way.
Okay, Bob, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. CABE did an awful lot of good work in terms of cataloguing quality and cataloguing how you achieve it, intelligent clients, master planning, how that library of information needs to still be made available, and they're still referring to it. And if you look at the Good Practice Guide for Estate Regeneration, it actually makes reference to a lot of those documents that are still available in an archive. The Urban Design Compendium was sort of cataloguing case studies in a big way, so it was actually referring to examples of good design. There isn't any plan to maintain the Urban Design Compendium. It is seen as being quite a sort of good document, a good sort of reference document, but I don't think it's going to be sort of continued as a document for updating or further updating. In terms of the affordable housing programme and previous standards and how the Building for Life criteria might be used, we know that Homes England are looking very closely at training for Building for Life, or they're undertaking training for all their managers in use of Building for Life. So you might actually find that it happens from ground up as opposed from top down. I think Building for Life 12 is still seen as being the sort of the default, if you like, although it's not the only tool. It is seen as a default for use, and we'd encourage very much local authorities or developers to start using it. Some of the house builders are actually starting to use it, and we're promoting it actively ourselves. Barratt, for example, use it on all their projects over a certain size, and rumour has it that Persimmon's started using it, although that's a rumour that we haven't yet justified.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Tumi Hawkins from South Cambridgeshire District Council. My council is very rural, and we are facing a lot of growth over the coming years. One of the things that I find that residents complain about is the fact that when new developments are built, it's always very urban, and villages they're feeling threatened because developers are coming in and plunking in urban design. Is any of your work actually addressing this issue of plunking urban designs in rural and semi-rural areas?
So we're very aware that can be a challenge, and obviously there's quite a strong focus in the draft revised NPPF around intensification, increased densities around urban areas and transport hubs. Within the design team, we've recognised that, so our aim is to hold a series of events across the country, and in each area we're looking at different challenges that might present themselves there. So certainly within our table of what we're intending to do at the moment, rural development is one of the key areas that we want to focus at a future event, yet to be determined. But once we have set that, then we will be going out and sharing that, because, as I say, we do recognise that that's an area that needs to be considered beyond what's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kirsty Paul. I work as a local authority planner. I've got two questions, really. So the first one's relating to the housing delivery test and the enormous amount of pressure now that authorities are going to be placed on to deliver quantity. How are we making sure through national policy hooks that there is still that emphasis on quality, and that planning officers feel confident enough to refuse developments based on design grounds solely? And the other question is around space standards. At the moment, they are optional. Is there any move to make those mandatory?
Space standards, yeah. I mean, the opportunity for local authorities to apply space standards in their local plans exist. Very sadly for me, I was on the challenge panel that actually sort of led to the space standard being sort of decided upon. It would not necessarily be my choice at the time to have made it optional to opt in. I would have made it optional to opt out. So I would have put it in a sort of more firm way, but within planning. That's still my belief. Whether they listen to me as an advisor or not is not within my gift. But I think you might see more reference to space standards coming forward. But I don't think you'll find that it's going to be mandated, not for the foreseeable. Your earlier question was about, your first question was about how do you ensure that quantity is counterbalanced by quality. I mean, it's quite explicit in the revised draft of the NPPF, which will be finalised, I think, and will be issued before summer, that local authorities should and can turn down schemes on the basis of good design, of poor design, sorry. Whether that's explicit enough that enables local authorities to decide that big programmes might therefore be compromised and that the numbers might not be delivered is, I think, a recognised challenge. How do you make sure that local authorities deliver the quantity but also the quality? I don't really want to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of activity, we're doing various things to sort of support local authority and their ability to do that. So Andy mentioned the Planning Delivery Fund in terms of increasing capacity and capability within local planning authorities. Our intention is to share some of the learning from those who've received that funding to show where it's had an impact and how it's had an impact. In terms of things like guidance that sits alongside the revised NPPF, we're contributing to that to make sure that, again, there's more information about design quality and how that can be used as a tool. And certainly things such as the tools and techniques and community engagement work that we're going to be doing. We're going to produce a lot more sort of advice to support in that. We also supported through the Planning Delivery Fund the Design Network, who are doing a lot of work around the country through their various partners, working with councillors to sort of educate them around design quality and the importance of it, just to make sure that when it comes to decision making, design quality is understood better so that it can be used as a reason to refuse something if it's a poor quality design.
I think it's just one further point is the role of PINs in this, the inspectors. Now, if the inspectors actually are brave enough or have a sort of good enough understanding of where government wants to be on quality, and it underpins a decision to reject a scheme on the basis of poor quality, that would send a really big message out. So I think the role of PINs could be quite important here, in my view.
I'm Ben Warner. I'm a Major Projects Advisory, Suffolk Councils. I think there's some great initiatives and policies and guidance that we can all form collaborating together. But what struck me in terms of being absent from the slides and what you presented was the way that building better relationships is essential to that, and particularly the way that we need to change our personalities and the way that we communicate with each other as well. I think there's always this issue that in collaboration there's a risk that this adversarial effect infects the whole process. And I think as planners, we've come a long way, certainly in the last 10, 20 years, but there's still a long way to go. And I think there's still a personality problem on both sides of the fence. So, what sort of relationship counselling can we achieve to try and build better design quality?
I would agree with that, and as I say, I think that's the main reason that Steve Quartermain was keen for us to be well represented at this event, because he sees that as a really integral part of delivering that design quality and a recognition that work needs to be done. So, and I think, as I say, the fact that the design team sits within the planning department gives us a real opportunity to do that, because we can draw on the worlds that Andy comes from, that I come from, and that Steve comes from, to start bringing it together and having some of those collaborative conversations.
Yeah, thank you. It's Councillor Ward. I'm portfolio holder for planning, Rochford District Council. There's a couple of things that you can maybe help us with. We have lack of resource, really lack of resource in planning with regard to the council. I'm interested in this planning delivery fund. Is that something that you're looking for us to bid for to get more planners in? Also, we need to free up the barriers to enable PPAs with regard to ourselves and developers. We need a lot more scope in being able to get money from developers, to get people in place. Gentlemen at the back talking about collaboration and working with local people and getting out there working with local people. One of the biggest problems that we face is lack of infrastructure. That is the biggest thing. So no matter how clever your designs, no matter what you're doing with design, it doesn't make a scrap of difference, because resistance is coming because infrastructure isn't being put in first. And until that is addressed right throughout government, I'm afraid that we're not going to be building anything until that is addressed. And I think that's the major problem.
Yes, so with the Planning Delivery Fund, there were awards handed out last year to local planning authorities who bid for that funding. There is a further tranche coming. There is still money left within that pot. I think it will be towards the end of the year. At the moment, the criteria for that and what the department will be asking for is not determined. So we're in the process of determining that at the moment. So we're anticipating in the near future to go out with a call for offers for bids for the final pot of that money.
I think your point about infrastructure is absolutely spot on. One of the characteristics I find from coming in from the outside, from the private sector to government, is just how compartmentalised decision making is, or has been. The answer to it is much greater sort of cross-departmental working and greater understanding of the different interrelationships. But I would say it's actually starting to happen quite a bit. So infrastructure and housing are sort of recognised. The Department of Transport's right opposite the Ministry's office, and there's more interaction going on than there has been for a long time. The Healthy New Towns and the NHS recognise the importance of the integration of health and housing. You know, that's a breakthrough, massive sort of understanding. I think how you front fund is going to be the issue, isn't it? And it's about how you put that infrastructure in first, and where there is a landowner who actually understands or retains the ownership, like they did on Northwest Cambridge. You know, put the school in first, and you know the residents will come because of that investment in infrastructure. I think that's the key challenge, and whether government will actually put money up front for developments, and we've got some very significantly large developments in Essex coming forward, so how that actually happens is one to watch. But I think you're seeing it break down a little bit more now than it did before. That's the only thing I'd say.
And I think Andy's right, there are some really good examples coming through, so the more evidence that there is of that being an important, an effective way to do it, then the easier it will be for those initiatives to be brought forward.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much for your time this morning. I think a round of applause again for